This video is for educational and entertainment only. My goal is to inform others about the true horrors of manufacturing, selling, and being addicted to methamphetamines for over 20 years, and only getting caught once 5 years ago. I've been clean from all substances ever since that day. I cannot confirm or deny that any of these stories ever happened or that I have made over 25,000 drug deals since the mid-90s. Maybe I'm just a guy with a very good imagination who can make up incredible stories with amazing continuity throughout many dates and timelines. It took me 5 years for me to get a clear head in order to even think about these stories without them triggering me or urging me to return to the life I led for so many years. By viewing the contents of this video or any other video of mine, you agree to not attempt or recreate anything seen or heard while viewing them. I am not confessing to any acts stated in this video. The contents of this video should not be treated as factual or a confession. All names have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty. Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. This story is from back in 2008, and it's a story about Brad and Nate. Brad was the younger brother of a friend of mine that I went to high school with. Brad's older brother, Steve, was 3 years younger than me, which would mean that he graduated in 1986. 15 years later, Steve was killed in a freak accident at work, and then a year after that, Steve and Brad's mother died from cancer. Brad was always a smiley kid and had his whole life in front of him, and all of a sudden his brother and his mom were gone. I don't know why, but it turned Brad into a real son of a bitch, and he never respected anybody after that. And I believe that he turned into a sociopath. He knew the difference between right and wrong, but he just did not give a fuck. Maybe it was because he started doing meth instead of coke, but I'm sure all the drugs he was doing had something to do with it. And the same guy who taught everybody else how to make meth also taught him. Everybody was making meth and chasing around recycled metal to help pay for it, because the value was up and copper was up to about $3.50 a pound. At that time, China wanted all the copper they could get. One day I stopped over at Brad's house, and him and Nate were there. Nate had a big trailer behind his truck, and it was plump full of copper wire. I was kind of jealous of the score they found that day, and I had things to do, so I told them I'd talk to them later. They were going to go somewhere out in the woods and burn all the plastic off the copper, which is what you did in order to get the most money out of it. So I went about my business and thought nothing of it. But the next day I got a call from Brad, and he told me that right after I had left, that he went into the house to wash his hands and say hi to his dad, and when he came back out, Nate was gone, and that he took the whole trailer and left without saying a word and basically ripped him off. Brad told me to bring someone that I trust and that we had to get Nate back because, after all, Nate took all the wire, and now Brad couldn't get a hold of him, and Brad didn't know where he was, and he really needed the money, and that trailer load is probably worth at least $2,000. So I brought my buddy John with me. It had been 3 days since Brad had seen Nate, and Brad was fucking pissed. So Brad got me and John all riled up and convinced us that we had to go break into his storage shed and burglarize it with him. At this time, we were all high as hell from smoking meth and all revved up, and Brad had us all talked into helping him rip off Nate. And in those days, the surveillance cameras weren't shit, so Brad had already disabled the cameras. And that night, Brad, John, and myself all put on gloves, and we went and cut the lock with a bolt cutter, and we went in his storage garage and basically took everything. At the time, I still couldn't believe that Nate had ripped Brad off. He was such a nice guy. Me and John never got anything of Nate's from that burglary because we were just helping Brad because he had gotten ripped off and he just wanted to get some money back. Out of all the stuff that we took, there was one safe and a lockbox that was with all the stuff that we took, and we brought everything to Brad's house and out to his garage. I remember amongst the contents of the lockbox and the safe were a lot of automobile titles, pictures, and letters from Nate's dad, who had died a few years before. In Brad's shop was a wood stove, and I remember watching Brad taking them pictures and titles and all his dad's personal belongings and lighting them on fire with his lighter or throwing them in the wood stove. He told us he was burning the evidence. Well, at that time, the buzz was starting to wear off, and the adrenaline rush was gone, and me and John just wanted to go home. That was the first time John ever met Brad, and he was not impressed. And after that night, I basically cut ties with Brad because he was just a little bit too out there for me. A year went by, and I was selling meth to this couple that I had met basically they were selling it for me. Things were going pretty good, but one time I stopped over there, and there Nate was. He was installing a new back door on their porch. He was a handyman and basically doing a job for them so he could get some meth from them. I said, "Hey, Nate, how's it going?" Nate was older than me, but he was a pretty big guy, kind of like me. Then all of a sudden he says to me, "I heard through the grapevine that you and a buddy of yours were the ones who ripped me off and busted into my storage garage." You see, the one thing about Brad was he was stupid because my buddy John was loyal to me and he didn't know Nate or Brad at all, so I knew right away that Brad was the one who told Nate that me and someone else burglarized the storage shed, which was totally untrue because Brad kept everything from it and we didn't want anything from it. And for some reason, a piece of shit threw us under the bus. You see, I always try and tell the truth, and I don't try and sugarcoat anything, so I asked him, "Why would you think I would break into your storage shed?" He told me he doesn't really even give a fuck, but he just wants the stuff of his dad's back, and that there was a lot of stuff with sentimental value that his dad had given him before he passed away. I finally said to him, I said, "Well, you know your old buddy Brad?" I then told him the whole story, and I told him that Brad kept everything, and that Brad told us that Nate had ripped him off. And as far as his dad's stuff that he was wondering about, I told him that Brad burned it all in the wood stove. And then Nate went on to tell us what really happened. When he had that big trailer full of copper wire behind his truck, he had told Brad that he had to get going because he had a wedding to get to. So he took off and went home, got dressed, went to the wedding, got drunk, passed out for 2 days. He went on to tell me that when he finally got over his hangover, he had tried to call Brad for 2 days straight. We pieced it all together that when he was trying to call Brad, we had already stolen everything from him, and Brad wouldn't answer the phone because Brad thought that Nate was onto him. He told me that the day after that, him and Brad went and cashed in all the copper, and they split the money. At that time, I hadn't seen either of them for a year because I was off doing my own thing. And within that year, Brad and Nate became friends until one day Nate went over to Brad's house and saw Brad playing poker on his computer at a gambling site. And then Nate had Brad show him how it all worked, and then Nate borrowed Brad his credit card, which was his mother's credit card. Brad showed Nate how to get $25 worth of credits with his credit card, and then Nate gambled that away until he had lost the $25. And then Brad reassured Nate that when he deleted the information, that his mom's credit card would be safe. 2 weeks later, Nate's mom's credit card was drained of $4,000, and she had to pay it all back herself plus interest. Brad had promised him that he would pay her back little by little, but the piece of shit never did, not even one penny. After that day, me and Nate became really close friends. He actually appreciated the fact that I had told him the truth, and he got to find out what happened to his dad's stuff, but he was devastated. Brad was such a fucking scumbag, and Nate was such a nice guy, but I believe that at that moment he really wanted to kill Brad, and I didn't blame him. Nate lived with his mother, and she was in her 80s. Nate had a very unhealthy lifestyle. He would try and be a meth dealer, but two things prevented him from being a successful meth dealer, for lack of a better term. The first thing was he was addicted to doing hot rails, which made him use too much of the drug that he was trying to sell. And he couldn't pay back his dealer, which was me. And the other thing was when he would crash from the meth, he would crash for 4 days straight. And I asked him if he would go 4 days without eating, and he said no. He would wake up every 6 or 7 hours and be half asleep and groggy and you know in the basement of his mom's house, and he would wander to the fridge and get something unhealthy to eat and then go back to sleep. Despite all that, he became my driver for a while because I trusted him and we had some really good times together. He had a great sense of humor and he made me laugh a lot. And one night when we were driving around making drops, Nate and I drove to his house because he had to show me some wood cabinets he had been working on. When we got there, he showed me the cabinets and he got a can of linseed oil and gave the cabinets one more fresh coat of linseed oil and then put the oily rags in a box, and then we closed the garage door and went back to business selling meth. It was a nice hot summer day, and then a couple hours later he got a phone call, and after he hung up, he said that he has to go drop me off quick, and he has to get his ass home because he got a phone call, and it was his brother that called him, and then he told me that his garage was on fire, and his mom was sleeping, and she's in the hospital, but she's going to be okay, but her dog died from smoke inhalation. Things went downhill for Nate after that. Every time I would give him an 8-ball to sell for me, I wouldn't be able to get a hold of him for 3 days, and when I did, he never had any money for me, so I really couldn't afford to hang out with him anymore. His mother was the sweetest old lady you'd ever want to meet, and she just loved Nate, and so did everyone else. Nate's mom finally got her new garage built, and after about 3 months after the fire, Nate told his mom that he was going out to mow the lawn, and I guess she was in the house, and she heard the lawnmower just keep running and running and running, and she looked out the window and saw the lawnmower running, but Nate wasn't there. So she walked out to the garage, and he was laying on the floor dead from a heart attack. His heart had gave out. His mother was devastated, and so was I, because I always planned on hanging out with him again if and when we ever got clean. I figured about 90% of the people who are doing meth always plan on getting clean someday, but for most of them, that day never comes. So that's what happened to Nate, and he is missed by many. And if you're wondering about John, me and John remained friends. He moved away for a short time to get out of town and away from his warrants and court troubles. He did finally get caught and brought back to town and did some jail time. And when he got out, he went back to hustling on the streets, and there was a misunderstanding, and he almost got beat to death, and he suffered a brain hemorrhage and never really was quite the same since. Me and John have been close friends for roughly about 10 years, but after that TBI that he had gotten, his memory was fucked, and it's hard to have a relationship with a friend when that friend can't remember anything we did together for the past 10 years. Then he got clean for a whole year, and then 3 months ago he relapsed, and he's back out there on the streets. And if you're wondering about Brad, he is still a piece of shit, and he still has no friends. This is where I usually say to you listeners that I hope you enjoyed this story, but this time I will say I hope hearing this story has made you think about maybe quitting meth and getting on with your life, or maybe listening to this story will deter you from ever trying meth. So you know the drill. Leave a like or leave a comment, or better yet, subscribe to my channel, because I will never run out of stories. Peace.